Well, joining me now from Beirut is Dalia Ghanem. She's a scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Center and participated in the protests. In Paris is Teevan, coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And with me here in the studio is North Africa analyst Lakhdar Ghettas, author of Algeria and the Cold War, International Relations and the Struggle for Autonomy. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Dalia, let's start with you. We spoke before Bouteflika stepped down. Now he's gone. But is the system still in place? Has it really been a victory?
Well, let us be optimistic and say that this is a victory. It is a victory in the sense that, you know, the Algerians took up to the street 7 weeks ago, and they took up to the street in a very peaceful and civic way, and they succeeded in making their president resign without any drop of blood being shed. So it is a victory, and it is a beautiful lesson of peace that they gave to the world, especially to the Arab world. However, let us also be realistic about what has been done and what we can do. The system, the Algerian regime, is a very complex and opaque system, and it is a very complex structure of powers. It is composed by, you know, a pyramid in which at the top of this pyramid there is the Algerian military, and the rest, it's composed by several circles of power. These circles are, you know, the FLN apparatchik, the business tycoon, the bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. So the regime, the deep state, is still there, and I think it will be very hard to remove it and to enroot it, if I may say.
Lakhdar Ghettas, was it a military coup by the army when Bouteflika and maybe some of those closest to him were no longer serving a positive purpose to them?
Well, the semantic side, technically it is a putsch. It is a military putsch. It fits the normative, the standard definition of the removal of the leadership of the state or the threat by force or the threat of using it. The thing is that Bouteflika himself is not illegitimate. He is not in the eyes of the Algerians since he amended the constitution in 2008, and then the fourth term, and then the forced fifth term that was underway. So technically it is, but he is not illegitimate there. When his term is coming to an end in a few weeks, then yeah, but. Polity databases will probably enter it as a coup, a military coup.
Teevan, so Ahmed Gaid Salah, the army chief of staff, said enough is enough. Bouteflika is not capable. The man stepped down. Is the army trusted enough by the people for them to say, okay, we're going to give you some time to have a transition to democracy?
I believe that on Friday we are very, very likely to see large protests again. I think for a small part of the population, certainly, this may be an acceptable solution. But I do think that the vast majority of Algerians, and I was in Algeria also last week, and speaking with civil society, with young people, and with business leaders and political leaders, and it was very clear that there is a desire for a much broader change, as Dalia mentioned before. And whilst it may not be possible to uproot the deep state in its entirety, I think that there is a lot more needed in order to satisfy the protesters. So it's very clear that even those who seem to accept the army as a potential mediator for this process will not accept the likes of Ben Salah as, you know, interim president, because this is a Bouteflika era appointee who is seen as very much representing the system and the old way of doing things. This is also true for the head of the Constitutional Council and also for the new government, of course, of Noureddin Bedoui. So as long as key positions are held by these people, I believe that there will be continued unrest.
Dalia, you were on the ground, on the streets. For as long as Ben Salah and Badawi and these guys are around, are people going to be very skeptical?
Indeed, you know, I was on the ground and I marched with Algerians on March 22nd and then on March 29th, and the slogans were very clear. One of them was روح روح يا بوتفليقة وخذ معاك قايد صالح, which means go Bouteflika and take with you Gaid Saleh. So even if Gaid Saleh is recognized as somebody who has been in the side of Algerians, people do not want Gaid Saleh because they don't want an Egyptian scenario. They don't want Abdel Fattah al-Sisi made in Algeria, if I may say. So they don't want Gaid Saleh, but they don't also want Ben Saleh as president of the transition. What the Algerians want and their demand are very clear. They want all the system to disappear. They want the departure of Bouteflika's clan. They want the departure of Bouteflika supporters, and they want the departure of Gaid Saleh and the military to play a less important political role. You know, the Algerian slogan that became very famous in Algeria that says in Arabic, which means you will all be removed, embody exactly what Algerians want. And I don't think that, you know, the Algerians and the street is going to calm down. As a matter of fact, you know, people are already preparing for tomorrow's big demonstration, and they are already organizing slogans, the chants, and so on and so forth. So I don't think that Algerians are going to be satisfied with that.
Okay, and Lakhdar, I'm glad that Dalia brought up the Egypt comparison, because when I bring it up with my Algerian friends, they get very angry. They say, we're not Egypt, and don't compare us to Egypt or any other countries in the Arab Spring. But how realistic is that fear that we will have a Sisi-esque transition here, where we saw when Mubarak went, SCAF came in, and there was a little moment of bubbling democracy and so on, but eventually Egypt went into military hands again. How realistic is that fear, and how wary are Algerians about that?
Well, the comparison is stark, but the political elite in Algeria, I think, is mature now, and more than it was in the 90s. The army in the SCAF in Egypt managed to play the political the opposition against each other and managed to reign over them. That system cannot playbook cannot work in Algeria now. That's one reason. The other thing is that you've seen the series of speeches made by the army, by Gaid Saleh, over the last 6 weeks. They've been very cautious not to appear as overtaking or taking over the power. Remember when the African Union in 2002, they passed a new resolution that the Union will not recognize any regime that in a coup in Africa. And the irony is that Algeria, Bouteflika himself, 2002, 3 years just after he came to power, played a role in implanting that in the constitution of the African Union, because he was fearful then of the army might remove him. The fault lines in Egypt on which the army, the SCAF, played over were the Islamist secularist one. I think we are, to a large extent, not totally, but a large extent, we are beyond. Certainly, the masses in the streets, it might be in some pockets of the polity of the political leadership or the political society, but the civil society, the masses in the streets who came out, we are beyond that Islamists versus secularists. So I'm very confident that that won't happen, and the army doesn't want to appear as making a coup, an overt coup, although it is technically.
Okay, so you feel civil society is more robust and there's a greater political maturity. Chloe, I don't want to lose the opportunity of asking you about exactly where you are now in Paris. They must be following this closely. The former colonial master of Algeria, the French, they always end up in any conversation with regards to Algeria, what would they be thinking right now, and what would they be planning to do?
Well, it's clear that the French are quite keen that this should be a managed transition, and President Macron actually came out and responded to Bouteflika's statement on 11th of March to say that he welcomed this managed transition. The response within Algeria was furious. People were so angry that France was taking a position in this, which they see as being absolutely none of France's business. But throughout the protests, there were a huge number of references to the fact that France should stay out, that Macron should keep to himself. A lot of very, very smart posters showing the cutting of the cord between France and Algeria. And there has actually been quite a lot of imagery that suggests that the regime is, that the pouvoir is very much linked with the French, with the French elites, and that this popular revolution is actually also something somewhat about getting rid of that connection with France and of breaking this dependence on France.
Dalia, okay.
So
yeah, let me ask Dalia about that.
There were responses.
Right. Sorry about that, Chloe, because we're running out of time. So Dalia, do you believe that this is an opportunity to make that break with the French?
Well, you know, I think the best that France can do right now and Emmanuel Macron can do right now is to stay put and to avoid any kind of declaration that might anger and frustrate Algerians. As Chloe said it before me, Algerians are very jealous about their integrity and the integrity of their country. So they don't want any kind of involvement. And actually, as a matter of fact, the signs showed it during the demonstration when people said, Macron, do not mind your own business or mind your yellow vest. So I think what Macron should do right now and France is, you know, to watch closely but not to get involved, because Algerians insisted on the fact that this is an Algerian matter.
Lakhdar, what do you think about that? How place Algeria right now in this transitional period and its geopolitics, both with looking north at the French and the other Europeans, but also looking at the African continent?
Well, as far as France is concerned, this is a real chance to really establish a real democracy in Algeria, transition democracy, and to that the Algerians will own their own future and their own will of decision and power of decision. That needs radical change, peaceful radical change, the change of the polity, of the leadership, establishments of a real democracy, institutions, accountable institutions, and that would put us on the rails, pave the way to a more robust and a more confident and legitimate leadership in Algeria, with the legitimacy behind the leadership of the country. Then Algeria can speak more forcefully in dealing in the matters and not seek the support of the European Union or of the White House in keeping the legitimate leadership in place. So when this regime felt the heat of the protests, the first thing it did is it dispatched Al-Amamra and Brahimi to the capitals and to Moscow, European capitals, and to Moscow to seek the support. And that was like an abject and stark expression of how this regime is really not in place by the legitimacy and support of its own people. It pretends that it is representing, but rather the force. And we've seen it in the posters. Shame on you, getting behind the international powers against Algeria. As far as the Africa, Algeria, I think one of the problems that marred Bouteflika's reign is that he disregarded completely let's say, the geopolitical depth of Algeria, Africa. Algeria was one of the founders of the African Union. We've got immense strategic stake in Africa, and yet he never made a single trip to the African nations. See what's going on, in Libya, and Algeria is completely removed from.
He never made a single trip in 20 years. I didn't even know that.
The only thing he made was in 2003 or 4. He made one with Albright to Ethiopia to manage a sort of.
That's a good point. Okay, so it could be an opportunity, right? Listen, we're running out of time. Dalia, I want one final answer from you. He used to be a charismatic leader. He was a hero. He helped bring peace to the country. And now we look at him. He's a sad, fragile old man. He said sorry. A lot of people feel sorry for him when they see these images of him because he can't even say it verbally. Do you forgive him?
Well, you know, I can't speak in the name of all Algerians, but I would say, unfortunately, President Bouteflika tarnished and sullied his image by himself. Until a few weeks ago, he was remembered as, you know, the architect of peace, the architect of the national reconciliation in Algeria, the president who brought back Algeria on the diplomatic arena after 10 years of diplomatic isolation. Unfortunately for him, he is going to be remembered as this old president who was clinging to power despite all the calls for his people just to leave. But I do believe that Algerian will find, you know, the strength to forgive him one day.
Dalia Ghanem, Lakhdar Ghettas, and Teevan, it's been a pleasure having you all on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much.